So you work with the biggest stars. I'm sure you don't want to answer that.
No, I don't mind.
Yeah? Okay.
Good evening and welcome to Let's Talk Movies. This is your host Maximilian from our studio in Los Angeles, California. In the past several years, with the rise of streaming services and more recently during the pandemic, the scramble for content has made film viewing and the film market a much more global experience across the board. So our goal here each week is to open up the dialogue and talk movies from the many points of view that reflect the world of cinema as it's happening today. With the Oscars wrapping up the so-called award season in Hollywood this past Sunday, we would like to ask you, do these awards really represent what is cinema today in the global landscape? Many of these awards ceremonies, which of course are very prestigious, have been created many years ago, decades ago. Do they really represent the best movies in the world? Do they really represent us today? Maybe yes, maybe not. Let me give you another example. The Academy Awards that represent the best in the world only have one category dedicated to international feature films, with only 5 films in it, in the whole world. Think about it. What about the past? How we did it 20, 30, 40 years ago? Did times really change? We're joined today by André Sogliuzzo, who can maybe help us going more in depth with questions today. Not only is a Hollywood historian, he's one of the most prolific voice actors in Hollywood, best known as Sideswipe in the Transformers franchise, the 2 engineers from the Christmas classic The Polar Express, from hundreds of video games including the current blockbuster Back 4 Blood, and the brand voice of Red Bull in the US market. André, good to have you.
Thank you, Max. Good to be here.
What's your take on this?
Well, that's always an interesting sort of problem in a way when we try and say something is the best picture. And it's very difficult. I mean, for example, the Academy always prides itself on sort of honoring the best in the art or the finest films that maybe reflect or transcend or comment or change our culture in some way or shine a mirror on what's sort of happening at a certain moment. The Academy gives a lot of awards. They give, that go into the ingredients of a best picture, best costume, best cinematography, best music, best director. So one would always hope that the thing that wins best picture that year maybe is the sort of pinnacle of all of those categories all rolled into one film. And oftentimes it can be. But then oftentimes it might not be. And so you would suddenly look at the category as a subjective one.
But when you say subjective, does that mean that maybe we're not awarding the best movies? I mean, is our society depending on the times that we're living in, forcing to vote in one specific direction?
Well, a perfect example of what we might say in its day, a film you would say, well, it's a subjective award, as it often is. For example, if we just take a look at a year like 1981, it was a very crowded Best Picture category, Best Director category. And if you look at 2 standout films that year, for example, what is now considered one of the greatest films ever made, a classic which kind of changed our perception of cinema, would be a movie like Raging Bull, for example, where you had all of the ingredients of a Best Picture. You had an incredible cinematography, incredible editing, sound, music, and a kind of raw drama that many of us had never seen anything like that on film before. Also that year was Ordinary People. And Ordinary People was a very somber, beautifully portrayed drama directed by first-time director Robert Redford. If you hold those 2 films up together, what won that year, of course, was Ordinary People for Best Picture and Best Director. But again, so in that year you say, well, that was kind of a subjective win. Redford was kind of a beloved movie star making his first film. That film also had Mary Tyler Moore in a very dramatic role that no one had ever seen her. So in its day, in its time, it was kind of a standout. Now, Raging Bull was too. But if we now look in the 30, 40 years later, what stands out is Raging Bull as one of the landmark great films of all time. So in its day, you would say that Ordinary People win the best picture might have been subjective. But that subjectivity often, if one looks at the history of cinema, that subjectivity, if one looks at the history of cinema, is often taken care of by time.
What do you see in the present and in the future?
Well, what is now kind of happening in cinema, in the culture, in the Academy, in the perception of movies. The Academy is always trying to honor, or prides itself on honoring, the greatest in its art form of that given year. And they are always often trying to pick a film that shines a mirror back on the culture as they see it in that specific moment. As the culture has gone through a very dramatic 4 years where a certain kind of prejudice in the culture, a certain kind of political discourse that became extremely divided and extremely ugly. The Academy suddenly shined a light on itself, and they suddenly began to look at their own flaws and maybe their own failures in terms of awards that they weren't giving over the years. For example, if we take a look at Halle Berry winning Best Actress as a black woman, it took 20 years again for that to happen again. If we look at an actress, for example, like Cicely Tyson, who did an incredible film in 1972 called Sounder, a transcendent performance, she wasn't even nominated in that year. All the actresses who were nominated were wonderful. Jane Fonda won for Clute in that year. Again, Cicely Tyson wasn't even acknowledged. And then when they finally gave Cicely Tyson a Lifetime Achievement Award, the Academy did it off camera. The Lifetime Achievement Awards aren't even honored in the evening. And, so I think the Academy has suddenly become very, very conscious of that failing. And what we're seeing now is a kind of rapid course correction that almost feels unnatural sometimes. It's a necessary one, but when it sort of all happens very quickly, and I think it's happened in reaction to the past several years that we've been through as a culture, it feels almost too quick, unmerited.
André, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. Good to be here, Max.
Coming up, an exclusive interview with world-famous filmmaker Mike Newell, director of global hits such as Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Donnie Brasco, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Mona Lisa's Smile. He has a lot to say about working with the biggest stars in the world. Thank you for being with us.
I have the immense pleasure of having next to me one of the biggest director in the world, Mike Newell. Thank you so much for being here in Ferrara. So first time in Ferrara, I suppose?
Yes, and beautiful, and I'm enjoying it, and it's absolutely tremendous to be here. Thank you.
And it's our immense honor to have you here. I had the immense pleasure of spending a couple of days with you, and the story, the little stories, the little details that you mentioned, they're very, very, very interesting. So let me ask you. So, you directed such great movies. 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Mona Lisa's Smile, Donnie Brasco. Even blockbusters like Harry Potter. So, what is out of this wonderful career? One of a couple of memories that just randomly sometimes you just open your eyes, you think about it, and you remember fondly. If you can remember something.
Sure. I remember fondly where I began, which is long before anything that you have described, which was in a television company in Manchester, in England. And they were a very good company for drama. Mm-hmm. They had wonderful writers working for them. And I came from the south of England, and I came from a medieval town. And so I didn't realize what the north of England was like. I didn't know about industry and red brick and stuff like that. And I got there when I was 21, and I've walked into a completely different world. So I'd been at school in the south of England, I'd been at university in Cambridge, I had always medieval, right? And now suddenly, bang, there was Manchester, which was industry and very energetic, but the people were completely different. There is that thing about the English where, what they do is they actually stand off those. They don't, no. And in Manchester, they absolutely come forward. Hey, how are you? How are you? And that was a revolution in. We can get around that. Don't worry about it. It was a revolution in the way that people behaved and the sort of stories that they told. And I began working. When I very first worked, I began on a soap opera, a very famous soap opera. And of course, the soap opera was concerned with ordinary people's stories. And so suddenly, having studied Shakespeare and literature the whole time, all of a sudden I was dealing actually with life in a street. And that was an enormous revolution and a complete revelation to me about
to adjust in this new world. How long did it take? Did it take a while, or you get used to it pretty quickly?
It probably took 6 months, a year, something like that.
Okay.
Wonderful. And that took a while, but they also had different concerns. They were warmer and more open. Of course, what happened was that the people who were writing the stories reflected that.
Of course. And it's very similar, like north and south of Italy. As I'm listening to you, it's very similar. North and south, it's very much similar. What you
and they're very warm up there. They're sweet, warm people.
That's really
so. That
cool.
was a huge change. And then simply, I spent 10 years working for that company and making more and more complicated dramas. And then we all, my generation, because my generation is the same generation, for instance, as Stephen Frears. We were at university together.
Yes.
And we began not to want to, we wanted to open up. The stories needed to be wider, the stories needed to be more out there, the stories needed to be more complicated, and above everything else, what we wanted was that.
Oh yeah, the camera.
Yes.
I know.
Because when we made television, what we had was not one of those, we had 4 or 5. And you would just go bing, 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 bing.
That's true.
And it wasn't like, what is this shot really? What's this shot about? What's it going to do? And so we were very ambitious to have that camera.
That's very true.
And we began to make television films. And from there, we moved, quite naturally into small features, and then on from there.
So let me ask you, you work with the biggest stars on the play. You work with Al Pacino, with Johnny Depp, with Julie Roberts, and you name it. So there is a huge difference between working with your lead actor, like a superstar, or a fairly unknown actor. So obviously, I would like to ask you, would you like to work better? But I'm sure you don't want to answer that. But it's
no, I don't mind that.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the point about the actors. Are we keeping going?
Yeah,
Is it
that's
okay
fine.
with right? The point about working with the actors is really to do with the relationship that you can manage to make. Now, I mean, just take those 3. Johnny, Al, Julia. The relationship with Julia was difficult for me. I think probably difficult for her. She is consummately a professional and a very, very good actress. And so those things don't show on the screen, but they're there. Whereas with Al is one of the great actors and he can express by doing almost nothing. If he thinks, it'll be there. Somehow or another, it'll be. I don't understand actors. I think they are
that's very interesting.
I think they're wonderful, but I don't know how they do it. And if I did, I suppose I would be an actor. But, you know.
What about Johnny?
Well, Johnny is, and whereas Al is absolutely an actor and a kind of classically trained actor, and he can work in the theatre, he can work in films, all over everywhere, because he has a very big, solid training. Johnny is started as a. Tell me where we want to go. We just okay, cool. Johnny is somebody who rose through his wit. He's a very intelligent man, and through his looks, he's very beautiful. And he also he's got a wonderful sense of humor. And he's a mimic. He can absolutely, and what he looks for in a character is he looks for the little qualities, the quirks, the eccentricities, and then he'll pick them out, and it's like he puts them on a pegboard and dit, until suddenly you can sort of see, that connects to that, and that connects to that, and suddenly there is a performance. And so he's in a way, he's more. It's much more difficult to predict what Johnny will do than it is to predict what Al will do.
Al Pacino, yeah. Very different methods.
Yes. But they were sweet and they were kind, and you know that they're great stars. And if you think about it in terms of military rank, Al Pacino outranks you. He outranks everybody.
You mentioned when I asked a couple of days ago how was working with Al Pacino, so you just stay out with his way. Right?
Yes. Yes.
You don't direct,
Don't get in his
just
way.
let him do him.
Absolutely, don't get in his way. I mean, we had. And partly what that's to do with is that he has an extremely private and acute instinct. So the character that he played when I worked with him. It was important that, shall we continue to move?
Yeah, sure.
The character he played when I worked with him, it was important that he wear glasses. He had specs the whole time. Well, what happens when that happens on a movie is that the prop man gets 200 pairs of glasses, right? He lays them all out on a table, and then the actor comes in and he chooses the glasses he wanted. Well, I was there when Al did that because the glasses were very important. I needed to know what he was going to do.
And we're talking about Donnie Brasco, right?
This is Donnie Brasco. And he... Bang, that one.
So very quickly.
No, not particularly quickly. He was looking at them very carefully. Maybe it took 20 minutes. But he absolutely knew what he wanted, and he put the glasses on, and they made him look like a kind of demented wasp, like some crazy insect, right? They were very elaborate, and well, he looks slightly nuts in them. And of course, what Al knew was, and one of the reasons that the part and the project interested him, was that he'd done all of those crime movies. He'd been Michael in
Right.
The Godfather.
Right.
He'd done, the drug movie, and he'd done all. But what he'd never done was a little guy, somebody of no importance, and he'd never done a person who could make you laugh. He'd never done comedy. No, people didn't know him for a comic actor.
You're scanned through blockbusters, historic movies, drama. So, out of all the movies that you've done, what would you love to do that you haven't done yet?
Oh, I'd love to make a Western.
A Western.
I'd love to do a Western.
That's amazing.
I'd love to do a Western. I'd love to do a musical. Those are the two things that I haven't ever done, and I would just for the hell of it. And I once found the most wonderful script by John Milius, which was a Western, and then for some reason it just kind of floated away. We couldn't get it made. It was very frustrating. It was tremendous. It was about an Indian, and thinking back on it, I think that if I'd known then what I know now, I would have said, there's this actor, his name's Johnny Depp, he could play this. Right.
Thank you so much, Mike. An immense honor. Thank you so much, dear friends, and have a wonderful day. And viva il cinema.
Okay, yes, viva il cinema.